Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our Backyard Natural Resources webinar series. My name is Amanda Bachman. I'm the Pesticide Education and Urban Entomology Field Specialist for SDSU Extension based here at the Pierre Regional Center. And today we're going to be talking about grasslands with Laura Kahler. Before we get started with that, I just wanted to point out a few features of the Zoom. Keep an eye on the chat. We'll drop links to resources and surveys there. If you have a question during any point for our speaker, for Laura, feel free to put that in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop or desktop. We'll handle those questions at the end of her presentation as we have time available. And also during the presentation today, there's going to be some interactive poll questions just to, kind of who wants to be a millionaire, test your knowledge. Feel free to answer those. Answer them as sort of quickly as possible. We're not grading you guys. You're not going to get a report card at the end of it, but it just helps us to, make the presentation a little bit more interactive, and also for you to kind of play along at home and see how well you know what you know about grassland sort of South Dakota trivia. So those will pop up. If you miss them, don't worry about it, but I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that there will be some interactive poll questions during today's presentation. Also, if you missed any of our previous sessions, the ones last week were on soil health and on water. Those are recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel along with today's session, and then also Thursday's session, which will be Robin Butterbaugh and myself talking about biodiversity. So with that, I'll turn it over to Robin to introduce our speaker.
All right, thank you, Amanda. And I'm happy to have Laura Kahler here. She is the director of the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative. The Grasslands Initiative is a collaborative network for diverse organizations, agencies, and individuals to join together in support of the grasslands. Her background is in agriculture education, and she ranches with her family in South Central South Dakota, raising commercial cattle and Targhee sheep. And so you might be wondering, what do grasslands have to do with backyard natural resources? Well, Laura is here to tell us all about that. During her presentation, she'll provide an introduction to the substantial loss of grasslands in South Dakota, the importance of our grasslands to the state's economy, ecology, and human communities, and how the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative invites you to play a role in supporting the grasslands as an urban or a rural South Dakota resident. So thanks, Laura, for being here, and we're excited to hear what you have to tell us today.
Thank you so much, Robin and Amanda, for inviting me and for everyone joining us over your lunch hour to learn a little bit more today. I know that when we think about the grasslands, we usually think in kind of a larger scale space of it, but I think it's really relevant that anyone who's interested in ecology and the environment from a backyard scale on up is aware of what's happening with our grasslands in the state, and as a lot of the things can apply on different scales as well. So I'll get my presentation pulled up here quick. All right, can everyone see? So this
Yep,
is,
looks good.
I'll be chatting a little bit about the Grasslands Initiative and our work. Later on in the presentation, I'll share a little bit more about what the Grasslands Initiative is and ways that you can get involved. But let's start off just talking about the grasslands. So when you see these images, to me, all of these pictures really summarize important aspects of South Dakota and what's envisioned when we talk about South Dakota. The one piece that I think is often overlooked in all of these images is the grasslands. I've been guilty of it myself, but when we look at these pictures, the grass is just kind of the green filler somewhat. But by really starting to understand and appreciate the grasslands and the role that they play in the ecosystem, we can know that we need to take better care of them. So we're going to start off with our first Q&A poll. Like Amanda said, if you're not in a space that you can click in and participate, that's fine. But if you're at your computer and want to, the first question should pop up. So in the, oops, hang on a second. Let me go forward on my slides. In the 1700s, when the first explorers of European origin arrived, what percentage of present-day South Dakota was covered by grasslands? Give you a few seconds to put in a vote. We've got some good experts in the room. Majority is correct that it was 96%. So basically the entire state, other than the Black Hills, which was a little bit of intentional forest, and that's an area that we want as forested area there, but the rest of the state was all grasslands. If you're interested in learning more, there's a great book called The Ecology of Dakota Landscapes. You can take a picture of that book. Would really recommend it. It talks about North and South Dakota and how our grasslands developed. So moving on to the next question. In 2016, what percentage of South Dakota is classified as grasslands, and what percentage was cultivated land, respectively? So your first option is A, 50% is grasslands, 26% cultivated. And then I'll let you read them on the screen. A few more seconds. But it seems like we have a pretty smart audience. You are correct that A, 50% of our state now remains with grasslands and 26% of it's cultivated. So we know that we're losing grasslands to reasons other than cultivation, but that it's really had a significant impact on the grasslands in our state. So if we back up and think on a broader scale, the United States has lost what percentage of its original grasslands? And here on this map, you can see the original Great Plains grasslands that we had. So what percentage do you think has been lost in the United States? You're right to guess that it is high. Seeing a lot of 73%. Good job. So 73% has been lost. And while we know that the grasslands are really important to South Dakota is also really important to the grasslands. So if you look at this map of the grasslands around the world and the grassland loss that's been happening, obviously your eye is automatically going to be drawn to that dark green that shows some of the remaining intact grasslands. We zoom in on South Dakota. You can see this white spot on the map in where you expect South Dakota is. That's the Black Hills. So that's not grassland loss because that's the hills. But south of us, that dark green is the Nebraska Sandhills. To the west is the Wyoming Central Basin. And then you can see that our state is holding on to some of the remaining grasslands that's really important to the country and world. But as we move east on that map, we can see that grassland loss start to increase. So why am I talking so much about grassland loss? Why does it matter if we're losing grasslands if the land is still being used for important things? That's what we're going to delve into first. First and foremost, the grasslands are an abundant source of food. They are really important to the rural communities and a lot of livestock that's raised on the grasslands. Even the cattle and livestock that maybe doesn't spend its entire life on the grasslands has at least a portion of their life on the grasslands. And that's also really important to rural communities. When you think about the fact that a rancher who has their cow-calf operation and is on the land, that means that they're also going to be sending kids to the local schools, shopping in the coffee shop, going to the farm stores. And so by having grassland producers that have their livestock on the land year-round, those producers are supporting the food system, but they're also supporting those rural communities, and that's a very important thing. Okay, next trivia question for those who want to participate. How does South Dakota rank for calf production in the US? So there's different categories of cattle, but this one's talking about calf production, which is predominantly done on grass. So in that setting, where do you think South Dakota falls? You guys are excellent at this game. 5th is correct. So obviously Texas, larger space, different setting. They are first, but we are really doing well for calf production. A lot of that is due to our grasslands that we have. The next thing that I want to visit on is that we really need to care about our grasslands because they're good for the herd and good for the birds. A lot of the practices that improve the grasslands and improve the health of your cattle can simultaneously help the environment. For example, the birds. The other day I heard a quote that said, one of the ways to support conservation is through your consumption. And I thought it was really meaningful because as a consumer, when you vote with your dollar to purchase products like grass-fed, or not even grass-finished, but livestock that has spent life on the grasslands that's managed well, you're then supporting conservation. One way that I want to chat about that, for an example, is the concept of rotational grazing, also known as regenerative grazing. In a more traditional setting, livestock producers would, in the spring, take their livestock to a pasture, turn them out, and the cattle would be able, cattle, bison, sheep, any ruminant livestock would be able to graze that entire pasture, going around picking out its favorite plants, but it wouldn't necessarily have an even distribution through the pasture. Because of that, rotational grazing in different formats has become really popular. And the conservation groups are really supportive of this as well, because while this rotational grazing means that the grassland producer is able to produce more grass, therefore have more cattle and economically benefit them as well, there's a lot of ways that this shows how rotational grazing is healthy for the landscape as well. For instance, there's grassland birds that do well on, they like to nest and do their mating in a shorter grass system. But then throughout the year, as the chicks hatch, they need to have a little bit more cover and have that grass growing taller. Rotational grazing works really nicely for that. As the cattle are, sorry about that. As the cattle are moved through the pasture, obviously they're going to graze down one paddock and move into the next, and graze it down and move into the next. So this is a really nice system and an example of how that relationship between cattle and the environment can be mutually beneficial. And on the note of birds, why do I bring up the fact that birds are something that we're concerned about? How many different bird species do you think live in or migrate through South Dakota's grasslands and depend on them to survive? Oops. 300 plus species come through. And another reason that this is really important to note is that when we look at the study that took place in the 1970s, recording the populations of all of the birds, and maybe you're familiar with this, since that 1970s date, when we do other bird surveys, we're able to compare the data to see how different categories of birds are doing. As you can see on this chart, the only category of bird that has increased in population is our waterfowl. A large reason for that is because of the hunting groups that cared about it and the policy that went into place to support the habitat for those waterfowl birds. On the flip side, if you go to the bottom of this chart, the category that's seeing the most extreme loss is our grassland songbirds. So having good habitat for our songbirds is really important. And one way to do that is by working with the landowners or the ranchers who have large tracts of land to encourage them to do good management systems to bring in the bird populations and have this win-win situation. The next thing, I think many of you are probably aware of the importance of the biodiversity that exists in the grasslands. But going back to that first slide where I showed the different images of the grasslands, when we think of grass as just grass, we're missing out on all of the different aspects that make up the grasslands. So for instance, from a distance, this photo does just have that grass is grass look. But as we dig a little deeper, we can start to realize that all of these different plants exist within there. It's a little harder to notice when they're not all flowering or heading out with their seeds, but there's a lot of different plants that can grow in a healthy native environment. Another resource I'm going to recommend if you haven't already acquired this is a book called Grassland Plants of South Dakota and the Northern Great Plains. It's a really good reference book to see what different plants are out there and the characteristics and start to learn a little bit more about them. It's a great field guide. And when I'm talking about the characteristics of plants, here's an example of some of the different plants that we have in South Dakota and the different characteristics that they bring with them. And it's important to know that different plants have different characteristics so that as a producer, it's important to know this. So that way when I'm grazing, I know which ones are our warm season grasses, and those warm season grasses grow best in the summer, and which ones are my cool season that are going to be growing more in the spring and fall. Looking at this chart, you can also start to get an idea that there's plants that might be ideal for grouse feed, even if they're not ideal for cattle. Some are great for both, some are good for one or the other. And obviously we're not just talking grouse, but any bird species, and the idea that each plant has value, even if it's not just for one intended purpose. And so by having a wide variety of plants, we can also attract a wide variety of animals in the space as well. And for instance, there's some wildflowers that need a certain pollinator, and that pollinator needs that plant, and they're really dependent on each other. So by having a very biodiverse environment, it's going to be really important. And so from the urban setting, this is where you can really play a role with finding, even if it's a small space, that you can bring in some different plants and have that variety. It's an important step. If you were at Pheasant Fest this year, you might have seen this backdrop. It's a beautiful image that shows some of the different ways that the grasslands are supporting life. And so as I was looking through this, it got me thinking about the importance of that different variety of life in both plants and invertebrates and mammals and birds. So when we look at our grasslands, we know that they provide hundreds of different plant species. They're home for a lot of endangered species, like the American burrowing beetle, black-footed ferret, and swift fox. So we need to protect that habitat for them. And it's this amazing, incredible system that's designed to work in harmony. And despite what the grasslands have going up against them, they're really resilient and well-designed to withstand a lot of stress because of this beautiful system that it has. So I just started kind of going through in my head about how everything's interconnected. So hopefully you'll be able to follow along as I kind of go through some thoughts here. But for instance, we have something like the American burrowing beetle, which plays an important role, similar like our dung beetles, at removing the waste. And they take that waste on the grasslands and convert it into moving it into the healthy soil and development. So from there, we get this nice, healthy, lush soil that the Midwest is known for its good soil, because the Midwest used to be pure grasslands. So it's developing this good, strong soil, which then gives us nice, healthy plants. And we want our cattle to be consuming grasslands and moving through the grasslands. Grasslands are one of the few environments, when we compare it to things like forests, that do better because they're grazed. If you have a grassland space that's never grazed or utilized, or burned is another option that it can be, have that go through, but the grassland isn't going to produce as well. So by having cattle grazing it, it's this mutual win-win benefit where the grass will grow healthier as long as it's grazed to an appropriate health or height and not overutilized. Then we know that because our cattle are on the landscape, things like birds are going to be able to come in and use the space better as well. We also know that having good soil can be really beneficial to wetlands and our water. And then having these grasslands for these other species is also really important for pollinators, which is good for the pollinators. And in the case of things like honeybees, is beneficial to us as well. So speaking of honeybees, I'm throwing up my next trivia one. In South Dakota, the honeybee industry has an annual revenue of almost what? A, $9 million, B, $17 million, $24 million, or $1 billion? It is $24 million. So we know that although there's a lot of different types of pollinators and bees, one that's really important to South Dakota when we think about why the grasslands matter to South Dakota and vice versa is the honey industry. Well, we were second in the nation for production in 2023. And we know that pollinators are really beneficial for things like alfalfa, sunflowers, fruits, vegetables, and wild plants that are needed. So we need to have those all living so that we can also have wildlife feed and cover too. So supporting the pollinators is beneficial for that full cycle, including ourselves. Okay, the next thing I want to hit on is the fact that the grasslands create that amazing soil. Part of that is the root structure too that is developed within our grasslands. So I'll show some charts after this question. How deep can the roots of native grassland plants grow into the soil? So when we think about how deep those roots are, typically on some of the plants, how deep can they get? 4, 9, 12, or 15 feet. You guys are great. 15 feet was the majority answer and is the correct answer. So if you look at this chart, you can see some of the plants getting down to that 15 feet mark, and even the ones that are a little bit shorter still have very significant roots. The one, if you're looking at this chart, your eye's probably going to be drawn to those really short roots on the Kentucky bluegrass. So when you think about Kentucky bluegrass, that's the grass that is predominantly used in a lot of turf grass settings and lawns. And because of that, people are then having to mow and do a lot of care for that Kentucky bluegrass. However, with our native grasses, they're designed for our ecosystem. Out here in South Dakota, we don't regularly get heavy rainfalls continuously throughout the year. So these roots are designed to be able to get down deep, even in a drought year, and find the water, meaning that in an urban setting, if you're planting and using these type of grasses, you won't need to water them as frequently, and they can dig down and find the nutrients and also have that root life down below. So if you were to seed 1 acre of big blue stem, if you had, or say even a 1/4 acre, think of it in a small scale, what would that impact be? But if you were to seed 1 acre of big blue stem, which is a common native grass in South Dakota, you would have how many tons of roots below the soil surface in 3 years? So there's a photo of big blue stem. So you can get an idea that it is a pretty tall grass, but how many tons of roots would develop under the soil? $5.5 tons. So then in that same big blue stem stand, where we had 5.5 tons of roots being grown in just 3 years on 1 acre. So in that same amount of space, what percentage of that root is being replaced annually? Getting a variety of answers, but this one is 25%. And why that matters is because then those roots that are being replaced becomes organic matter, building to that soil health. And you can just imagine how dense of roots we have in that soil. One second. There we go. The next thing to note is that it's really important for our water. I know that I would much rather drink water that came straight out of a well from underneath my grasslands than in some other spaces, because we know that the water is being cleaned through the grasslands. I want to take a little bit of time and show something that maybe some of you have seen. This is called the rainfall simulator, but it really pulls together some of the ideas of the importance of that soil health and the water because of grassland. So we're going to watch this video of a rainfall simulator that I actually watched yesterday. I tried to pull the wind sound out. Pardon me if it does get a little heavy wind there. So just pretend like you're sitting outside for your lunch break today and watching this there. But the things that we're going to do here is compare 5 different soils. And these soil samples were taken directly from the space. So the conventional tillage was taken from a field that has that conventional tillage happening. And then we'll be able to compare it to no-till, continuous grazing. So continuous grazing is that system that I talked about in the beginning, where the cattle are put out same time every year. They move across the pasture as they please. And then they're taken out at the same time every fall. So they're not hitting different types of plants at different seasonalities. And then we'll also see rotational grazing, which is that little bit more conscious system where cattle are being moved through and has a little bit better variety of plants in the ground. And then also looking at a cover crop. So we're seeing some grassland and non-grassland uses. I'm just being mindful of what's the best option for our soil based on land use. So give me a couple seconds to pull this up. Thank you for your patience. But I think you'll really enjoy this. It's about a 5-minute video, but it really gives us a good idea of the impact on the soil and the water for the grasslands. And then I think a lot of this will also be applicable in your own backyard space. So if you haven't seen the rainfall simulator, enjoy.
And then we've got our soil health management system here with a diverse crop rotation. We've got cool season grasses and warm season grasses, both in our rangelands as well as on our commodity crops. We also have cool season broadleaves and warm season broadleaves. We want all 4 of those plant types present on our landscapes regardless of that land use, because each plant is associating with different microbes in the soil. We've got bacteria, we've got protozoa, we've got nematodes, we've got actinomycetes, we've got all species of fungi. And all of them, just like us, if this was a buffet line and we went and chose our food here in a little while, would all of our plates look exactly the same? No, they wouldn't. And the same is true with the soil microbes, is that each of them have a different type of diet that they select for, and they associate more or less closely with certain plants. So let's just turn on the water, and we're going to compare in the front jars the water that runs off of these trays, and in the back jars the water that actually infiltrates. Each one of those trays is like this. So the water can get through if the soil lets it. So what will likely happen here is that we're replicating, even though it seems pretty tame here in this setting, we're replicating a very, very heavy thunderstorm. We'll probably apply the equivalent of 2 inches of rain in about 5 or 6 minutes. And unfortunately, you can see that I'm missing one of my shields. I used it for a different purpose and I forgot to put it back in this tray. So those front 2 jars over there might get just a little bit more water in them than they deserve, but I think that we'll still make the point quite healthily.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, how about that?
Here you can start to see how that conventional tillage
soil is already
is running off
at a 1/4 inch of rain and not very much slope, right? I always try to put things in the human context. So if we had a pile of wheat kernels in my hand right now and poured water on it, the water would get through really rapidly, right? Okay, if we took those wheat kernels and ran them through a grinder, we'd have a lot more individual pieces that are smaller. If we did it again, a little less water would make it through in the same amount of time. Until finally we end up at a flour-like consistency. And what does flour do if you pour water on it on a countertop? It either turns into paste or it actually just completely runs off. It doesn't even go into the flour. It just, if you've got a little mound of it, it just sheds that water. And that's essentially what tillage does to otherwise healthy soil, is we make those grains so individually small that there isn't any.
So you can see what's happening in this video is the back jar is the water that's going through the soil. And the water that's not going through, you can imagine, is being absorbed within the soil. And then that front jar is what's just running off and not even being absorbed in the field and just coming off the field.
Crop infiltration stuff, right? Honestly, wouldn't even be afraid of drinking the water underneath our grazing lands either. Even though they're a little bit cloudy, that color has something to it. We're going to talk a little bit more about it once we almost overflow that jar. I'm going to turn off the water.
So the no-till runoff is pretty clear too.
Yeah, it really is, and I bet probably almost half of that water is straight out of that nozzle, because it doesn't usually run off any water. I think that's close enough to have made our point.
Hopefully from this image you can get an idea of
that one, and we'll we'll just flip them right over on that tarp.
So the one he's lifting right
Okay, our
now
buffalo
is
grass blue
continual grazing. So
Has a few
grasslands, but
pores,
not that
it's
ideal
mostly dry
system.
on the bottom.
This is a no-till crop field.
Our healthy soil is up and wet. And our
Okay.
conventionally cropped soils are completely dry at a 2-inch depth. One more. Okay, well, I'll pick it up. Actually,
And then here you
I
can
got some of that
compare
on my face
your
where it splats,
rotationally
see?
grazed grasslands. So you can see
So,
how
come close if you
advantageous it
can
is to
see
the
this.
soil.
I want you, even though these 2 trays that were collected last fall, look at the density of roots in this healthy rangeland versus that soddy buffalo grass blue grama sod. Roots at that depth for sure, but not near as much as here. And they've been in the exact same environment for the last 8 months. So I don't believe I manipulated it in that time frame.
So here you can see the water runoff versus the absorption and how the plants can better use it by having healthy grasslands. So I'll switch back now. Thank you everyone for tolerating the South Dakota wind in that video, but I really hope that that gave you a better visual than my explanation could have of why it's so beneficial to have grasslands in our systems and why our South Dakota soil is developed from and for this type of environment. So when we're thinking about the water that comes into our grasslands, this might be getting towards the end of our questions for the day. So if you want to be participating, go ahead and pull that up. Healthy grasslands on typical South Dakota soils can very easily infiltrate and absorb a rainfall event happening at 3 inches per hour. If that fell in a township of healthy grasslands, how much water would that be? And if you were to
Hey.
put that water in a 300-acre lake, how deep would it be?
Laura, switch your presenter
Oh, thanks.
mode. They can see the answer for this one.
Oh, man. Well, then I hope, well, some of you weren't cheating, so way to just use your best guess. But so the answer is 19 feet. And the thing that really sticks with me is that where I live, a lot of times if we have a heavy rain event, the ditches fill with water. Our infrastructure just isn't designed to do well in those heavy flooding. However, I often wonder that if it was just grasslands or healthier soils, what type of influence would that have on the township roads by having those healthier grassland type soils that instead of just that water running off like we saw in the video, it was truly absorbed. And what a waste that as a gardener or as a rancher, we really value that water coming in, and to just lose that to runoff is a terrible thing. So that's where I know that you've already discussed soil health and the importance of water and how it all connects back to this. Okay.
Laura, you need to swap your slides so that we can
Again.
just see the.
There we go. Is that what you needed?
No,
Hmm.
you need to switch the view because we're seeing the
Okay.
presenter mode view.
Thank you everyone for your patience on this. Any better?
No.
Still the same? Still the same.
And the recording thing is like in my way, so I can't see the top of your PowerPoint bar, but there's usually a button that's like swap
Yep, that's what I've been
presenter
doing.
and presentation mode.
Let me try this from scratch. Any different?
No.
No difference. Still.
Now it's better. Now you got it.
Okay.
It's switched
Thank you
over.
everyone for your patience. Okay, and last but not least, I imagine some of you enjoy our grasslands just as a place to enjoy. So without even thinking about the economic value, we know that we love having these grasslands because it's a wonderful thing that in our state, we can go outside and go hiking and just enjoy our grasslands. But of course, for the sake of statistics and numbers, let's think about each year how many non-resident hunters join South Dakotans in hunting, which is often done on our grasslands. So how many people come in and join South Dakota for hunting? $81,000 is correct. So our population really increases because other people recognize South Dakota has this really beautiful special space and they want to enjoy it with us. So now going into, this is my last question of the day. What are the threats to North Americans' grassland? So we talked about grassland loss being a really big issue in our state. What are the threats that are causing it? And this one you should be able to click on a few of them. Yep, it looks like you guys are hitting on a few of them. Top three, conversion to cropland is causing some of the most significant loss, but also woody species encroachment. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And the third is improper management as well. Flooding isn't really an issue because as we spoke to, they're really resilient. Same with climate change and fire. Our grasslands are an amazing ecosystem that can resist a lot of issues. But the things like conversion and woody species encroachment, it can't handle. This chart is really interesting. On the far left, you can see how much of our land is being lost because of land use conversion, so changing it from grasslands to croplands. But then also you can notice that woody, what we call woody encroachment. So woody encroachment means the grasslands that used to be grass now have trees populating, usually an invasive species or a very highly spreading plant type. Typically, we talk about eastern red cedar with woody encroachment, but there's other plants as well. You can see woody encroachment is a very big problem when you compare it to what we'd expect to be the biggest problem, which is conversion. So here is a map showing why maybe you didn't hear about much woody encroachment before. Back in the 90s, woody encroachment wasn't a huge issue in our state. It was popping up, but it wasn't really affecting things like it is now. As we move towards the 2020 map, you can see how the southern part of the state is really getting a lot more woody encroachment, and it's called the Green Glacier, and it's just expected to continue to grow. This photo on the right is along the Missouri River. I'm down in Gregory County is one that's really dealing with this a lot. Here's a photo back in 1981 that was taken in Gregory County. And I imagine that I know that we've got listeners from around the state, but I think a lot of you, if you start looking at fields around you, you'll start noticing this. Eastern red cedars are planted a lot of times for windbreaks. They're great for that. They grow fast and they can live through anything, which is a wonderful thing. But if you plant them in a row and you aren't going around and removing the ones as they spread out, it'll continue to spread across your grassland. So here's a photo in 1981, 1988. So this is getting to a point where it's much more of a problem. 1994. So if you think of yourself as a individual who might be renting this land out for grass or for grazing, can producers really get as much grass off of this? And then when we start to look at 2008, it's going to be tricky to even find your cattle in that environment. So like I was saying, woody encroachment happens because we plant trees intentionally, and those trees can serve a really valuable role. But if a bird comes and takes some seed and then is flying away, poops it out, all of a sudden we start getting this spread. And so it's really important with woody encroachment. And my plea to you today is A, just be aware that it's happening. Start to drive around and notice where you see woody encroachment. And if you do own some land that maybe you rent out, that you run, that you utilize, regardless of the size, make sure that in your grassland space, you have trees where you want trees and you keep grass where you want grass, because these trees, as you saw in those photos of the progression over time, really spread quickly. And then there's all these consequences of that. We lose our forage production, we lose grassland wildlife. A lot of times we think of trees as being good for birds, but they're not for the grassland birds. The grassland birds are developed to be in a grassland setting, and really having trees can bring in predators for them as well. We have wildfire risk can increase if we've got all that woody trees. And another thing that I think is important and often overlooked is a lot of the land. So even if you're not directly involved with agriculture, if your school system uses school land that they lease out to get money for the school, like I was saying, as producers are able to put less cattle on that ground because it becomes infested with trees, that means less money coming back to the school because producers can't pay as much for land that they can't run their cattle on. So that's just something to be aware of. So the best way to deal with these trees is cut them off and doing occasional burning of your pasture while they're still young and small. All right, so I'm going to quickly go through a few things that are happening in South Dakota and the Great Plains for the grasslands, and then wrap it up with some things that I'd love you to do beyond just being more educated on the topic and being able to spread the message and help promote the grasslands. So this first thing is the Central Grasslands Roadmap. Basically, the thing to know is that communication's happening from Canada down through Mexico to discuss how do we work together for the grasslands. And that conversation involves state agencies, landowners, different NGOs, all coming together to say, this is our region. We are noticing that a lot of it, which used to be that green throughout for the grasslands, is becoming converted. What do we do to support the grasslands? So within our state, we took that concept of the Central Grasslands Roadmap and said, what do we do to have those conversations within our state to support the bigger picture? And from that, we've developed the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative. So it's a collaborative network of agencies, organizations, and individuals. So even if you're not professionally or personally involved in a group that's really active in the grasslands, but this is something that interests you, we invite you to be a partner to support the grasslands and the prairie ecosystems that depend on them. Our vision is a future where grasslands are elevated in their value as an integral part of South Dakota's social, ecological, and agricultural fabric. And our mission is to promote South Dakota's grasslands through elevating public awareness and supporting those who want to make an impact for the benefit of current and future generations. So if those are things that interest you, you can automatically consider yourself a partner. There's also the option to become a formal partner. So if you are part of a group that would like to support the grasslands, we'd love to have them join. Here's a list of some of our current formal partners. And so the thought behind this Grasslands Initiative is to really think broad picture and wide encompassing. So if you're part of a group that perhaps is a birding group or a pollinator group, or just a group that enjoys being outdoors and wants to support the grasslands, we invite your group to join as well. Some of the things that we're focusing on is how do we connect producers and programs for conservation, increasing communication between partners, increasing awareness, and using research to support the grasslands and educating decision makers. So if this is all things that you would like to do, we encourage you to go to our website, sdgrassinitiative.org, and you can fill out the interest form, which gets you on our email list. And voila, you are considered a partner. It doesn't mean that you have any commitment requirements, but you'll know some of the things that are going on, and maybe you'll hear about something that fits well with your capacity and interest, and you can get involved that way. And then we also have quarterly meetings and newsletters, and it just gives you an opportunity to become more educated on what's happening with the grasslands and ways that you can support it through your own means. So I know that this audience has quite a lot of gardeners and those who are looking at it more from a backyard setting. So what can be done for the grasslands in an urban setting? The first thing I want to make you aware of is that if you're a producer, or if you're an individual who maybe owns land, but you don't operate it yourself, you might be considered a non-operating landowner. So the abbreviation is NOLO. There's a really great resource pool there at nolosd.org that I would encourage you, or if you know someone in this situation, to sign up for. They are really great about sending out information to produce or to the landowners who maybe aren't on the land every day, but should know kind of some of the things that are happening in the world of the grasslands and ways that they can support it. So for instance, making the landowners more aware of the fact that woody encroachment is happening and some things that they can do can happen through this website. The next thing that I really encourage you all to grab a copy of, if you don't already have this, is NRCS published this great publication called Healthy Soil at Home. This is a really good handout on what you can do on any scale to have healthy soil, and a lot of that includes planting native grasses. For instance, when we were talking about that chart with the different grass heights, and on the far left, we said Kentucky bluegrass has really short roots. Some good options if you're looking at a more moderate height grass that would still look full and look nicely mowed, but have some more root depth to them. You can see that in the chart here. And on the left of the table lists some of the different names. Buffalo grass is the one on the far right of this chart. That one's maybe going to be one of the better options as an alternative to Kentucky bluegrass to still give you that nice green grass, nice height, but you won't have to water it as much. It's taking advantage of what's meant to be here in South Dakota. Another thing that you can consider doing is planting a pollinator plot. Multiple advantages to this. First and foremost, it's attracting pollinators and providing habitat, but it also provides habitat for songbirds and wildlife. A thing that I think is underrated sometimes with the pollinator plots is the importance of having these out in the space simply to increase awareness and appreciation for the grasslands. If somebody has a gorgeous huge tree in their lawn, we think, what a beautiful big tree. How great would it be if we had more of these beautiful grassland prairie spots in everyone's yards that were being appreciated as well. And as an added bonus, when you're using native plants, they're going to not require as much watering, and they can improve your soil health at the same time. If you're looking for plants that'll be certain colors and flowering at different times of the year, another great resource from the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition is a book called The Backyard Pollinator Gardens Guide, and it has this chart in there as well as other resources for creating a pollinator plot. Other resources to reach out to would be your local NRCS office or conservation district. NRCS offices are doing a lot more with urban agriculture now, including the pollinator side of things. So they've got some resources and programs available, as well as a lot of conservation districts. For instance, on the right side of the screen, this is an example from the Minnehaha Conservation District, where they have some options for kind of grab and go pollinator garden kits. And something I really like about this is that it has the sign, so you can put it out and explain why you have the landscape looking like it does. Another spot to look for funding options is habitat.sd.gov, and there's a wide array of resources there. And I'd also encourage you, if after learning this today, you also recognize that we need to be doing more to raise awareness and get people involved in the grasslands, is to support, encourage, and participate in existing grassland promotion opportunities. For instance, Good Earth State Park has a setup of different grasslands that you can go hike through and see some of the different types of grasslands that exist. If you're near Sioux Falls, there's also Pask Hill on Beaver Creek. There's a member of the South Dakota Grasslands Coalition that has a small farm there, and he's really enthusiastic about soil and grassland health. So if you have a Boy Scout group, just a social group that you're a part of, and you think everyone would like to or benefit from learning more about the grasslands or just being out in that space, this is another place where you'd be welcome to set up a visit and learn there. Events put on by different partners, such as the Grassland Coalition's bird tour, take advantage of those opportunities and go to them. And you can also go to the pasture walks that are being designed a little bit more for the grassland producers to learn about things that they can be doing to be better grassland managers. But I think it's advantageous and enjoyable for everyone to learn those things. So in closing, I have a quick 1-minute video that I want to share about the grasslands. These are publicly available on wheregoodthingsgrow.org. So if at the end of today you think, I want to share the message of why grasslands matter, maybe there's a way that you could share a clip from this website. There's 3 different videos available and some resources on there as well to share why our South Dakota grasslands matter. So I guess that pretty much summarized my entire presentation in about 30 seconds, but a really great messaging that exists if you're able to share that. So see that there's a few questions that came in, and I'll try to get through these quickly in our remaining 8 minutes. Another thing, I'll pull it up my email address, 1 second. Is that sharing right now?
No, it's not.
Okay.
You can just type it into the
course.
chat.
Perfect. I will do that. So feel free to give me an email. I'd love to visit more. If you are interested in helping promote this information, we can help connect you with somebody or a location where you can connect with the grasslands. So the first one, I see a question on what does the D and U stand for on the slide with the grassland plants book? And it was desirable and undesirable. Sorry, I didn't see that question come in sooner. Next one, really good question. I'm glad you asked. How does the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative connect to the South Dakota Grasslands Coalition? So the South Dakota's Grassland Coalition has been around for about 25 years doing great things for the grasslands in the state. They helped develop that commercial that I just showed you. And they do a lot for helping producers understand some different management techniques that they can do. So that way their grasslands can be more productive and more profitable and better environments for the wildlife as well. I would say the Grassland Coalition is a little bit more focused on supporting the producers. The Grasslands Initiative isn't necessarily an organization of its own, but it's more of just the hub where all of the different partners and supporters of the grasslands can come together. And when I showed you those 5 different goals that we're focusing on, we've got some work groups starting underneath those goals. So the partners are pooling to support some of those areas. The Grassland Coalition did also help. There was many partners that came together to launch the initiative, but the Grassland Coalition was kind of one of the leads for that as well. Okay, sorry. I want to put a portion of my backyard into native grass. Fantastic, glad to hear it. I tentatively have selected a mix of buffalo grass and blue grama, and I may add some Dutch white clover for bees. Any suggestions on prepping the existing turf? I would want to plant in August and September, and water will be available. So this isn't quite my area of expertise, but I do know that buffalo grass and blue grama will make a wonderful combination for you. If you reach out to the NRCS office, would be one stop, and also Pheasants Forever has some pollinator experts as well. So you could reach out to Catherine Beal with Pheasants Forever, and she'd be a good person to help you with that as well. They're also looking at putting on some programs for creating your seed mixes.
And I'd also say too, with SDSU Extension, we have our garden hotlines in Sioux Falls, Aberdeen, Rapid City, and Pierre. So you can access those on our problems and solutions page on the SDSU Extension website.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see another question that I'm excited about. There are many Farm Bill programs for producers. Are there any programs, federal, state, nonprofit, etc., for small acreage owners that are not producers but want to improve habitat, soil, water quality, etc.? Any prescribed burns for the small acreage owners that likely do not have equipment? So I'm gonna, so that I don't lose track, for the prescribed burn aspect, when I showed you Pass Kill on Beaver Creek, they do some prescribed burning there, as well as some other ones, but that would be a great connection to get started on how they do it on a small scale. Going back to your question about resources for small scale producers, NRCS has really made strides in the past couple of years addressing the urban agriculture aspect, and urban agriculture not just being Sioux Falls, Rapid City, but just that small scale agriculture. So nowadays, they're shifting things, recognizing that you aren't asking for funding and assistance in acres, but more square feet type of systems, and recognizing that what the needs are for improving the soil and water health on a small scale exists. So if you haven't been into your NRCS office lately, I would stop back in and talk to them about some resources that they can help you with. Okay, next one. Why does the NRCS continue to sell Eastern Red Cedar for shelter belts? This is one that I've struggled with myself, and I've come to learn that we need to recognize the right tree in the right place. And for some producers, getting that shelter belt put up is really important. And having some resilient trees is really important for their livestock aspect. So this is why it's not necessarily the tree that's the problem, but the lack of management around the trees. So I think planting red cedars isn't necessarily the problem, because in that one small space, those 20, 30 trees aren't causing the problem. When you remember that chart that showed the spread and that most of it happens within 100 yards of the original tree, that means if as a landowner you just go around and clean it up, then you can help reduce that problem. Any other questions?
I did throw the link in the chat to how to find your local
Mm.
NRCS service center. So for anybody out there, you can select your state and search your nearest and
Yes,
state and
thank you very
county.
much.
So Rapid City, Pennington.
And you've got some enthusiastic, great people in Rapid City, so. Mhm.
Yep, it looks like 414 East Stumer Road in Rapid is where that NRCS office is. But that link is, good for anywhere in the country. So if you're somewhere else in South Dakota, you can put in your location and see where your local NRCS office is.
And if you are looking directly for more urban ag assistance than your local office is able to provide, being as it is kind of a new thing that's being spread through the state, there's Rachel, and I believe her last name is Lauder, in the Sioux Falls office, and she'd be a great resource if your local office just isn't able to provide all the resources that maybe you're looking for. So great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Please feel free to reach out with emails of questions afterwards. We'd love to visit more about this. I know that this is a little bit different than just the backyard conversations you've been having, but I hope you agree that even on a small scale, you can be doing something in the space that you have. And even if you live in an apartment and you can help support these ideas, what a fantastic thing as well. So thank you very much for your time today.
And
Yes.
thank you, Laura, for joining us. Robin threw some links in the chat to some evaluation surveys that we have for folks. One is about this webinar series, and the other one is Garden and Specialty Crop Research Needs Assessment. So if you filled out that second one before, you don't need to keep filling it out every time we post it, but we're trying to reach as many people as we can this summer with that one. So thank you again. The recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we will see folks back here again for one more series on Thursday. Robin and I will be presenting on backyard biodiversity, same time, 12:30 Central, 11:30 Mountain. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Yep. Thank you, Laura, and thank you everybody for joining us.